Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, they say Paris is the city of love, and it certainly seemed so last year when Emmanuel Macron hosted Donald Trump on a state visit. And the American president is now returning the favour in Washington, D.C., with the world's media waiting to see if the bromance between the two leaders continues. They're not the first international leaders to cosy up, as our Ellie's been finding out.
There was a time when French presidents didn't look across the pond for their busy buddies, they just looked over the garden fence. Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel, two became one, and Makozy were quite the power couple. Food for thought, eh, mump? But if those two want lessons from the past, and knowing them they probably don't, then they should take a look at Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan.
And alas, I cannot imitate this wonderful American English accent. You ain't seen nothing yet.
They put the spesh in special relationship. A couple of generations later came Tony Blair and George Bush. Plenty of critics wished they'd kept their relationship to long walks in the countryside, but if not cheek to cheek, then shoulder to shoulder, they went into war in Iraq together. Theresa May was, of course, the first foreign leader to visit Mr. Trump in the US and to hold his hand. Bit orcs. But no such worry for Monsieurs Présidents, who've had already plenty of practice and have perfected their own handshake. Still going. Oh yep, no, carry on.
Cosy indeed, Ellie Price reporting. To discuss President Macron's state visit, we're joined by Sir Peter Westmacott. He's a former British ambassador to America and to France, and by the French journalist Marie Leconte. Welcome to both of you. It's quite an unusual bond. Are you surprised by the friendly, cosy bromance going on?
So I'm oddly not that surprised, because I think that, you know, Macron clearly is very comfortable on the world stage and has been trying to basically sort of conquer Europe. And I think that it makes sense for him to actually say, you know, there's kind of a power vacuum at the moment. Around, you know, the special relationship being not what it used to be. And so I think he's kind of trying to get in there. So it looks a bit odd, but I think it makes sense.
Right. I mean, is it a case, Peter, that Donald Trump needs to know who to call when he wants to speak to Europe? And it looks like Emmanuel Macron's the man.
That relationship's got off to a very good start. And Macron had the intelligence to invite President Trump to Paris for the Bastille Day celebration last year. That went down very well. There's been the famous handshakes. They talk to each other. So I think Macron is clearly one of the people he is most at ease talking to. There's Chancellor Merkel, but Chancellor Merkel a little bit weaker politically, and that relationship not quite as cosy. And of course, as you said just now, your reporter, Theresa May was the first out of the blocks to go and visit the White House, but hasn't been back there since. There can't be a state visit because she's not a head of state, and that relationship is a little bit different, in part also because Britain is, guess what, obsessed with Brexit, and we are busy sorting that out rather than dealing with our overseas diplomacy.
Do you think there's also a common cause because both of them see themselves as perhaps winning against the establishment, politically anyway?
I know, definitely, and I do think that they kind of, you know, that they're not... They are both sort of like very different, but also quite similar in the fact that, you know, neither is really the sort of person who you normally see as a sort of like, you know, a high-level politician. And they kind of just get it, you know, doing their own thing. Like there's no, obviously they don't fully have a party behind them to the extent that normally a prime minister or a president would. And then, yeah, they're kind of doing their own thing. So I think, and you know, they're nearly sort of like post-party political in a way, because Trump isn't really a Republican and Macron just created his own, yeah, nearly post-party political movement.
Right, but these are the similarities. There are huge policy differences, aren't there, and political differences, particularly on things like some foreign policy, on the Iran deal, on international trade, on climate change. But let's focus on that Iran deal. Can President Macron persuade Donald Trump that it's not a bad deal?
It's one of the big issues that he's going to be discussing with him, obviously, in Washington. the British government, along with 5 other members of the Security Council and Germany as a leading country in the negotiation with Iran, is absolutely clear that the Iran nuclear deal is worth keeping. Is it perfect? No, but it's the least bad way of having nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran and a nuclear arms race in the region. I think Emmanuel Macron will be trying his best to persuade Trump not to ditch it. But Trump doesn't like Iran, and he's surrounded by advisors who don't like Iran. And of course, he hates most things which are a trophy achievement of his predecessor, President Obama. So I just don't know the answer, and I don't think anybody does know whether he's going to succeed in getting Donald Trump to stick with the deal on the back of some side agreements which various governments have been trying to negotiate over the last few months.
What do you think? Do you think he'll be able to persuade a move on something, just as Peter has said, that actually the president, the American president, is intrinsically against?
I'm not sure, and I think there's been quite a lot of hubris actually on Macron's part, because he's kind of selling himself as the Trump whisperer. It's kind of, I think, the phrase that's being used at the moment. But I think, you know, and it's true that he does have a better relationship with Trump than most other leaders, but I'm not sure he's going to make him budge on that or the Paris Agreement either, because I think that was one of the main themes of kind of like this trip. I'm not sure he'll manage to actually make Trump move on anything.
Right, and doesn't that then go back to your initial point? You said it was, I think, a very clever idea that he invited Trump over, but in the end, what does it bring you? I mean, if he doesn't agree to change his mind on the Iran deal or on the climate change agreement, he's not really very good to his friends, is he, Donald Trump?
Well, that will be one of the issues on which the success of this visit is judged. You know, nice dinner, pomp, supper at George Washington's official residence, history, America's oldest ally against the tyranny of Britain, and all that stuff will be being played up. But if there is no substance, then people will be saying, well, what was all that about? Is Trump any use to his friends? Well, Trump has got very clear views on certain issues, as we know, and on things like tax and trade and protectionism and so on, he's pretty much stuck to what he was going to do. On some of the broader global issues, he has said one thing, and then he said, well, let's have another look at that. And we're not sure where he's really going to end up on climate change. We don't know where he is on Iran. I hope he doesn't do the wrong thing, because I think there's a real risk of that unleashing more instability in the Middle East. So I think, you know, let's see where it goes. But Donald Trump is clearly a president who is somewhat unpredictable, but I think if anyone can get him to see the other point of view, I think it is Macron. He stood up to him very firmly on dealing with Russia, on climate change, but he's also got a warm personal relationship. That's pretty unusual. So let's cross our fingers and hope that he has some real achievements for this visit.
What advice would you be giving the British government if you were still in your former role in terms of dealing with Donald Trump?
Well, I think probably the advice that my successor is giving. In other words, do not duck the issues where we feel strongly that Donald Trump is headed in the wrong direction. Stand up for our values, stand up for our interests, stand up actually for global stability and free trade, because we don't want to get into trade wars. We don't want to have more conflict in the Middle East. I worry that the alliance that's emerged between Sunni Arab countries and Israel and Donald Trump and Egypt and everybody else against Iran as being the source of all evil, and Iran is by no means perfect, but this could unleash further instability. The Brits understand that part of the world. We've got to say clearly what we believe, and we've got to warn him off doing things that we think are unwise.
All right, yes or no, do you think they'll fall out soon?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
OK, that'll be all we have time for.
So this was not meant to happen. We are meant to be America's best buddy. We are meant to be reaching out to the world, and we are meant to be champions of pomp. And Brexit supporting Trump is meant to be on our side. And yet there Trump was today, treating the French president to a state visit and feting him like a prince. One could only watch the TV feed from Washington with jaw on the floor. And to make it worse, President Macron played it well, simultaneously flattering the American president, like you do, while also prodding him to do the right thing.
It is together that we can resist the rise of aggressive nationalism that deny our history and divide the world. It is together we will build a new, strong multilateralism that defends pluralism and democracy in the face of ill winds.
I'm sure there was a bit in Adrian Mole's diary where he finds himself cut out of the fun when his best friend tags up with a rival, or was it Bridget Jones? I might be misremembering there, but was that the sentiment they were coping with in the Foreign Office as they saw the way it was going? Macron has been called the Trump whisperer, a man who seems to get through to him without giving in to him. But, that being said, it didn't all go Macron's way, desperate as he was to nudge Trump on climate change and the Iran nuclear deal.
People know my views on the Iran deal. It was a terrible deal. It should have never, ever been made. We could have made a good deal or a reasonable deal. The Iran deal is a terrible deal. We paid $150 billion. We gave $1.8 billion in cash. That's actual cash, barrels of cash. It's insane, it's ridiculous, it should have never been made.
President Trump sitting next to Macron as he said that. Trump changes his mind a lot, but not often at the behest of even the friendliest of European leaders. Well, should we be envious of the favourable optics of this Macron trip? Many here actually didn't enjoy seeing our Prime Minister holding hands with President Trump. Maybe we don't even want a special relationship if he's in charge. But at the very least, this might play to fears that Britain's global role is diminishing. Is it? Why? Here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
Well, this is something. Theresa May got mocked for some brief hand-holding. But today we saw kisses, some large primate-type mutual grooming, and proper hand-holding. At summits, we sometimes ask for a lip reader. But what would a mind reader tell us about Macron's day?
I like him a lot.
I think Macron has a very keen sense of the French national interest, and if Trump is in favor of Make America Great Again and Putin of Make Russia Great Again, I think Macron's mission is to make France great again. So I think there's a mixture of all these elements, but they do seem to get on quite well together, and that goes back to that famous invitation that Macron issued last year for Trump to go to the Bastille.
3, 2, 1, feu des scènes.
Behind today's carefully choreographed bonhomie are some hard power realities. France said it would strike Syria for using chemical weapons even if nobody else did, and then launched twice as much ordnance as Britain. And that sense of France being more ready to partner the US on military operations has been growing.
It is very different from previous French military policies. For example, Charles de Gaulle was really against going to any war, any military operation with the US. And Macron, who in other fields and has been quite inspired by de Gaulle, in this situation is really going the complete opposite way.
When Macron invited Trump to last year's Bastille Day parade in Paris, there were some isolated protests, but by and large most French people seem to have accepted it was in the national interest.
Macron from the very beginning reaffirmed the need to engage strategically with the US, but also reaffirmed that he would be absolutely clear when he disagreed. And I think there was a certain element of confidence in the French electorate that their president would be representing French interest.
Contrast that to Britain's position. Having rushed into a White House photo op early on in the presidency, Theresa May has been unable to deliver the promised US state visit. It's opposed by many in Parliament, and there are fears of huge protests.
Britain deserves better than simply outsourcing our country's security and prosperity to the whims of the Trump White House. So no more hand-holding with Donald Trump.
Macron's main aim in today's meeting was to keep Trump signed up to the Iran nuclear deal. Publicly, though, the president used the press conference to threaten Iran militarily. So for Macron, there will have to be some wins if he's to retain public support for this diplomacy.
Macron cannot return to Paris without getting something on the Iran nuclear deal, without getting something on American steel tariffs against the European Union, and can't get some idea of what Trump plans next. For example, in Syria, where Britain, France and America acted very, very recently, then the visit will look like flim-flam.
Macron has an imperial presidency, a large personal mandate and a public acquiescence that Theresa May could only dream of. But this budding relationship could easily be uprooted by Trump's ideology and mercurial personality.
Mark Urban. Well, joining me now is former British ambassador to France, Lord Ricketts. That gives us a British perspective. And from Paris, we'll get an American view from the New York Times bureau chief, Alissa Rubin. A very good evening to you. Peter, you were in France. Hollande couldn't have done this, could he? President Hollande. It's a little bit of chemistry. There's a bit of Macron personality at play here.
No, there is, certainly. And between world leaders, personality is something. I mean, if you spool back 3 or 4 years, David Cameron and Barack Obama were very close. President Hollande was not cutting a great figure on the international scene, shall we say. Now things are rather reversed. Theresa May is mired in Brexit, and we have this new, young, charismatic, dynamic leader in France who's made a real connection.
And you knew him when you were over in France,
yeah.
and you made a connection. Is he good at this kind of the small talk, the big talk, the tactile stuff? It clearly looked good at the tactile
He
stuff.
is extraordinarily good at charming and flattering and engaging people's attention. When you're in front of him, he's got blue eyes that absolutely lock onto you, and you're the only person who counts. And so he's using that charm, obviously for very political reasons, but he's made this connection with Trump.
Alyssa, have you been surprised at just how close the relationship between the two has been?
Yes, and I've been surprised how quickly it's moved forward, because I could easily have imagined quite a bit of hesitation on the part of both Macron and Trump to trust each other.
Do you think Trump actually likes something about Macron? Because Macron sort of seems, you know, he had this famous handshake game with Trump, seemed to be trying to be the one to have the firmer handshake. Is that the sort of thing that impresses the president, do you think?
Well, I think what impresses him probably is that Macron has a certain class, and I do think that Trump has sort of wanted to look more worldly and sophisticated than he often does, and to some extent being in Macron's presence sort of adds to his own sort of, I wouldn't say dignity exactly, but it makes him look a little more polished,
Yeah.
and I think that's something he likes.
OK, well, that gets us to the Brits. I thought we did class very well. I thought that was what we were the world specialists in. Peter, is this a sign that we are doing something wrong, or that we don't want to be Trump's best friend for reasons Mark Urban sort of describes? We've been a bit reticent about it. Or what do you think is going on here on our side of this?
We've been reticent about a state visit, haven't we? And particularly Trump coming here.
We've made him feel positively unwelcome, more than reticent, actually. We've told him no. I mean, don't even bother, apart from one or two people.
Yeah, and I think it's different in France, because I think French people, by and large, want their president to be out there and are prepared to accept that he may go to Washington, he may come home empty-handed. He tried, and then he represented Europe, and they respect that. But it is a bit different here, I think.
But do you worry that this is a sign that we're not being taken as seriously? Because there will be people saying, oh, this post-Brexit world, we're meant to be reaching out to the Americans, and here they are taking the French more seriously than they are us.
Yeah, and I think behind all the sort of flummery of a state visit, which, you know, is only a short-term thing, there is a more important message here. In the short term, Britain is completely consumed with Brexit. We're not doing a lot of foreign policy. You know, we're not really engaging with the big issues. In the longer term, when we're no longer in the EU, we won't count for as much in Washington. So we've got to try doubly hard. We've got to really go out there for an entrepreneurial foreign policy.
I mean, actually, in fairness, we have had some influence. I mean, the Skripal thing didn't look like we'd lost any world influence when we asked people to help us sanction the Russians somehow.
It was very well handled, that, and I mean the bombing of the Syrian CW showed that we are still players, but you know, we don't have a foreign secretary who commands respect around the world. The Prime Minister doesn't have any bandwidth really to be doing foreign policy. The whole government is consumed with Brexit. Okay, we can come on from there and we can rebuild.
That is a former British diplomat's view. Alyssa, I'd like to hear what your view is as an American observer of where the Brits are. Are we losing influence, losing profile?
Well, that's a little difficult to say definitively from sitting here in Paris, but what I would say is that it has been enormously helpful for the Anglo-American relationship to have the British as sort of the representatives of that in Brussels. And now that Britain is withdrawing from the EU and from that role in Brussels, I do think that the Americans are looking for a leader, for a European partner who will be there and who will carry some of their views into that forum, which they're otherwise pretty much excluded from.
Yeah.
So
well,
I think that that's quite a difference.
Yeah, that is a difference. Listen, let me ask you this. Does any of this matter? Because can anyone influence this president anyway? I mean, you know, we saw Trump standing there berating the Iran deal. That was one of the things Macron was meant to be upholding. Come on, what can he do it? Can anyone do it?
I wouldn't count on it at this point. It felt to me as if Trump went through about 6 different positions over the course of a you know, a couple of hours from before to after the bilateral meeting, and even during the press conference afterwards. So I think he's still in flux, and I think that's Macron's whole gamble, is that you try to sort of insert a few ideas, open a possibility or two, and maybe Trump will consider taking Macron up on it. But
all right,
maybe not. We'll see.
See how the relationship goes. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Now, we did ask the Foreign Office to talk to us about it all, but they said no one was available.